Hi, this is Ren.
This is Casey.
And this is All Walks of Film, End of the Year edition. 2018 is wrapping up, and for a lot of people, it didn't seem like the greatest year in film. But after you hear our list, you can definitely tell that there were a lot of good films that came out this year. It's just, there were pockets of time where there wasn't a lot of good stuff coming out, and when you have time to look back at the whole year, it actually looks a lot better than what it did like each month.
I absolutely agree with that. I will also say for me looking at the year, there was more of a twofold problem of, number one, a lot of movies that I thought looked really, really good just were not very good. And I'm usually a really good judge of being able to avoid bad movies, so I tend to have a more positive outlook on, oh, this year in film was so great because I saw all these amazing movies, and I didn't watch all these terrible movies that did come out. That line of being able to tell the quality of the movie beforehand was definitely blurred for me a lot this year. But then also, I think there was an ongoing problem of a plethora of pretty good movies with major problems that just are not going to be great movies.
Yeah,
and I feel like there was more of that than anything else. There was more of that than like truly great films, and more of that than like truly terrible films.
Yeah, and some of those films were like heavily praised by critics.
Yeah, just in comparison to their contemporaries, I suppose. There were a lot of movies this year that we didn't get around to seeing that looked pretty good. Mary and the Witch's Flower, The Meg did not look like it was going to be best movie of the year or anything, but it looked fun. Leave No Trace, Assassination Nation, Board vs. McEnroe, Border, I was really excited to see. Did not get to see that. Now I don't know how I'm going to watch it. Destroyer looks amazing. It hasn't come out around us yet. Prayer Before Dawn, Boy Erased, Monsters and Men, Vox Lux, Vice, On the Basis of Sex, Blaze. I really wanted to see Blaze. I just missed it. Now I don't know where to watch it. Sorry, 1 second. Mind the Gap, Free Solo, Let the Corpses Tan, Can You Ever Forgive Me looked like that was worth watching, but we didn't get around to watching it.
And I will say with absolute certainty that I'm going to watch it before award season because Melissa McCarthy is bound to get an Oscar nom for that role.
Right. A Star is Born is a movie that we didn't watch because I was dragging my feet on it. I don't want to watch the same movie 4 times. But then I found out that Lucas Nelson was what was his position? He was an authenticity consultant. Yeah, he was an authenticity consultant, and he and his band, Lucas Nelson and the Promise of the Real, are performers in the movie. So now I'm all excited to see the movie, and now I'm mad at myself that I ever didn't just immediately go watch it in theaters, because why didn't you market the movie, like, with Lucas Nelson? Like, come on! I only just found this out, like, last week. And now I'm really annoyed. We haven't seen If Beale Street Could Talk yet. We still have exactly one more day left in the year. Maybe we'll watch it before the end of 2018. We didn't see the Pope Francis documentary, and we didn't see the second Sicario film.
Yeah, and then this year was a year of, for me, a lot of disappointing follow-ups from directors that I love.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Unfortunately, there are a handful of movies that we're just going to list right out. It's not going to be anywhere on our list. It's not going to be an honorable mention. It's not going to be in the best of. Unfortunately, a lot of them are from people we really like. Widows is on that list, the new installment from Steve McQueen, who he's never done a perfect home run for me, but I've also always adored all of his movies. Every single one, with its issues, is still just like a beautiful work of art that is just very emotional and raw and really gets into the human experience in a way that Widows just didn't. Widows was not, it didn't tap into that emotion. As a thriller. It held on to the plot pretty tightly until the last 15 minutes when everything fell apart and it lost its mind. It just, all the marbles were all over the ground. And the performances were alright, but it was just so-so. If you've seen any Liam Neeson movie, you've seen this movie. And then there was also Jeremy Saulnier's new movie. He just knocked it out of the ballpark on his last film with Green Room, was just so good. His movie before that, Blue Ruin, was just so phenomenal.
And I'm still excited.
Green Room. Green Room was just a masterpiece. That film was so good. And
I'm still excited about his collaboration with Mahershala Ali for the new season of True Detective, which let's just hope it's better than season 2, because good God.
Absolutely. And still excited about that. And then his first film was Murder Party, which is a very film school amateur level film, but it has such a creative verve to it, and it's still really funny and really captured your excitement. And then Hold the Dark was just, it was very dull. It was very, everything is just super, super whispery. That's how you know it's intense movie, guys. That's how you know. And it just seemed to talk a lot about subjects that weren't fleshed out, or maybe weren't very well researched, or maybe weren't supposed to be given as much attention as they ultimately were in the film. It just seemed to want to go in different directions, and then just ultimately only took a couple steps down certain paths. I was like, that's far enough. We're done here. I definitely did not recognize that as a Jeremy Saulnier film. Like, if I didn't know, I wouldn't have watched that and have been like, oh yeah, that's one of his movies.
Well, this is another case of a director going outside of his comfort zone and actually using a script that somebody else wrote. And I think that's where the film kind of fell apart. Now, there's one film that I know is on your list that I feel that way about, but we'll talk about that later.
All right, cool.
The Coen brothers, Ballad of Buster Scruggs, like, while there were good segments in there, as a whole, it didn't really hold up. It dragged a bit, and I had a problem with its, let's just face it, racism.
Yeah, that's my problem, is I actually did really enjoy the movie. I really, really liked going back to this very traditional, almost Disney style of, here's the storybook, and we're just going to go through all these fairy tales, and here's kind of the beginning and the end of the chapters, and the little drawings, the little layouts were really nice. I loved the art. I liked how different it could be in a lot of the stories. And if you didn't like one story, there's another story. It's okay, kind of evens out. I thought all the performances were really fantastic. I actually really, really liked this movie, and I wanted to like this movie so much. And then there was all this racist shit with Native Americans, and I couldn't. That was just a deal breaker to me. That's just not acceptable. Like, we're done with that. We're not done with that. This shit still keeps popping up in movies, but why? That needs to go away. We need to be done with this just permanently. This idea of, like, and here's the big thing. You can make an argument of, well, it's it's the Western, and that's just how, the Native Americans were just portrayed as savages in the Western, so you kind of just have to roll with it. No, you don't. This is a postmodernist, I think, Western, where it's explicitly going against a lot of the norms, a lot of the stereotypes, a lot of the, genre confines of the Western. And they've done that before. True Grit was an amazing movie that broke a lot of the genre conventions of the Western, and even though it was almost verbatim the same script as the original True Grit, which I also like, it had an entirely different approach to it. You can do that. The idea of just well, it's a Western, so it has to be there is just stupid. There was no good reason to include that in these stories. It was just a shitty thing to do.
Well, yeah, and if you want your Western, I know this isn't a movie, but if you want your deconstructionalist Western, play Red Dead Redemption 2. Mm-hmm. It has an amazing story, and the gameplay is great, and it's one of the best games that came out this year.
Yeah, and if you want a deconstructionalist or maybe even a revisionist Western that is a lot better on the representation front, watch The Dead Man. And just try not to scratch your ears out because of the awful, lazy fucking soundtrack. Some people put that soundtrack as like one of the best soundtracks of all time because he just went into the studio and just strummed along at random as he watched the movie and they just went with it. I just think that's lazy and it sounded terrible.
Yeah.
That's a totally different thing. Definitely, though, there were a couple of other movies, follow-up movies from famous directors that we just couldn't get into. Annihilation, Alexander Garland, Ex Machina was so flipping good. I was so sold on Alex Garland as a director. I was going to follow him to the ends of the earth. And then he came out with his fantasy epic Annihilation that was just... It's not terrible. It's not god-awful. It's not Arrival. It's nothing quite that bad. It's just... and I get what it's trying to do. I get the subtext. I get the metaphor. I get the story. I'm not one of those people who's hung up on the, oh, but what is the shimmer? That's not really important. And there were some really good movies, or really good moments in the movie that were just some of the best moments in film of the year, for sure. I don't want to talk about it for people who haven't seen it, but there's just some stuff that you see and it shocks you and it upsets you in like this very surrealist way.
Yeah, the production design team and some of the prop really makers did a phenomenal job on the film. So, even though I had problems with the structural story, I do not want to take away the credit that needs to be given to those
the artists.
Yeah, exactly.
Film. Absolutely. The issue with Annihilation is it all comes down to the way he was trying to convey what he was trying to convey was not very effective. This concept, there's a lot of plot stuff that you can talk about in terms of like, well, why is it these 4 women who are being thrown out into the shimmer? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Putting all that aside, it's more of the issue of the characters are cardboard cutouts, they're paper dolls of the thematic elements that he wants to play with in the movie. And it feels very flat. It feels very forced. A lot of the dialogue was really cringy to me because that's not how people with these kinds of issues talk about their issues. And it doesn't necessarily have to be super realistic, but you kind of have to feel like it's coming out of the mouth of a human person. And that was severely lacking in this movie. And also, good God, the performances were awful.
Especially Oscar Isaac.
Especially especially
accent.
Natalie Portman. And these are amazing actors. I blame the direction 100% for these god-awful performances because you had great actors and across the board, all the performances were terrible. Tessa Thompson can do so much better than that. We know this. There is no excuse for these terrible performances. Like, there's no throwing it on the actors, I feel like. I feel like a lot of this came down to Alexander Garland had a specific idea for how he wanted them to behave, and it didn't work for me at all. So that was disappointing. Black Klansmen from Spike Lee. Spike Lee is a very controversial, divisive director. Sometimes he will make you love and hate the same damn movie, like Chirac. And Black Klansman was definitely a step up from Chirac. It did a lot of things I wish Chirac could do. I personally think the ending was phenomenal. You thought not so much. Adam Driver did a really great performance, but the issue with Black Klansman is that a lot of it comes down to the fact of, yes, it's a movie. It's not a documentary. It's not going to be entirely true to history, but you're kind of glorifying the wrong side of history in this. The main guy in Black Klansman was he wasn't the hero he painted himself in his own biography that he wrote, his own autobiography that he wrote, that this movie was then based on. This movie is based on his account of how great he was, and looking at it outside of his biography, history does not really agree with that idea that he was just like this amazing, awesome guy who was stepping in for the rights of Black people. And you can be like, well, that's outside of the movie, but I don't think it is. I think that's really gonna hurt this movie if you're, trying to snake oil sell your fake pseudo narratives of a more progressive history than it really was.
Yeah, another movie that was real big disappointment, but we were kind of expecting this going in, was Brian Henson's latest.
I wasn't even going to talk about that. I literally almost cried because that movie was so god-awfully terrible. Oh.
So I know the Muppets are very important to you and everything.
But Brian Henson specifically is. Oh.
Yeah, and that it was one of those movies that tried too hard to be edgy, but it was like edgy like somebody who is just going through puberty would be edgy, like not
What's
like...
up, my fellow children?
Yeah.
It was very much that style of humor where this humor is 30 years old. You really hopped on this bandwagon way too late. I love Ryan Henson a little too much. First movie I ever saw, Muppet Treasure Island. I was so scared to see that when I was a teenager because I was like, no, I love this. I'm going to watch it. I'm going to hate it because now I've actually read the book and it's going to be nothing like the book. No, Muppet Treasure Island holds up 110%. He also did Muppet Christmas Carol, which is widely regarded one of the best, if not in some circles, the best version of a Christmas Carol you can watch. He's done so much really phenomenal work with puppets. He's done so much good direction and good writing. You know he's capable of this. And he himself is a great puppeteer. I just absolutely adore him in Storyteller. He plays the dog that the storyteller is always telling his stories to. And then you see, he wants to come out with his own raunchy Muppet movie, and immediately the issue becomes, okay, so how are you going to make this different than everyone else? Because adult puppet humor as a niche genre is actually already pretty expansive, but it's also all pretty similar. It's all pretty uniform. The big breakout, obviously, is going to be Meet the Feebles, which is so out there and risque that most other forms of puppet humor don't really touch it.
Surprisingly, the same director who did The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Peter Jackson. And Meet the Feebles is phenomenal. I love that movie. I am also a major fan, you not so much, and I understand this, but I'm a big fan of the Greg the Bunny series. I understand by today's standards, it's not quite as risque as you might want it to be, but at the time that it came out, it was one of those shows that was taken off the air for being too risque. And it introduced a lot of these things that you get in other works like Who Framed Roger Rabbit isn't puppets, but it's the same thing but with cartoons, We're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about like some social allegories. We're going to have this thing of, puppets don't want to be called socks. They prefer fabricated American, and the word sock is a dirty word. You don't call puppets socks. We're going to do the whole puppet porn thing. You do see puppet porn in the Greg the Bunny TV show. In one of the special features on the DVDs, you can kind of ogle at it at your leisure. It's not just a prop thrown onto the side like it is in the TV show. There's a lot of, puppets being sexualized, puppets having sex, puppets being naked. Definitely a lot of puppets having sex with humans and puppets having sex with other puppets. You've got a lot of, and even with the humans, there's like some... Seth Green gets tricked into this woman who's posing as a high school girl on her 18th birthday who went skinny dipping in his neighbor's pool. He gets tricked by her into wearing a school girl uniform and getting tied up and making animal noises on tape that she can blackmail him with. There's some stuff like that. Eugene Levy plays Seth Green's dad, and he pop brownies together and the dad doesn't know. There's a lot of adult stuff like that. And the whole thing is predicated around the plot line of these puppets are making a wholesome children's cartoon in the style of Sesame Street, but behind the scenes, they're real life people with their own proclivities and whatnot.
Which, like, Meet the Feebles was sort of the same idea, except it was the Muppet Show.
Mm-hmm. Which the Muppet Show is a lot more adult than Sesame Street already. And also, the Greg the Bunny TV show had a lot of great cameos from celebrities. Corey Feldman made a lot of very controversial jokes, including one about Michael Jackson that I was just kind of like, how the fuck did you get him to say that on TV? What? So, I mean, you already had that, and that was a program, you know. You already have Avenue Q, which is, you know, I forget the character's name, but there is a character who sounds exactly like Flippin' Kermit. A lot of the humor around Avenue Q is very much, oh, this is the adult Muppets. This is the original concept for the Muppet Show. And then when you go to Logo TV, you have a lot of Avenue Q adult commercials that advocate for safe sex in really humorous ways. And for RuPaul's Drag Race, they do a lot of stuff with puppets because everybody loves puppets. You know, so there's already been a lot of groundwork done in terms of adult humor with puppets. So how is this going to be any different? And the answer is it's not. It's going to be a very shitty low-grade version of Who Framed Roger Rabbit that will introduce a lot of the same ideas that made things like Greg the Bunny and Who Framed Roger Rabbit more interesting, like some of the world-building aspects and some of the stuff about racism, but it's not going to do anything with it. It's just going to introduce it and then just forget about it. A lot of the adult sense of humor stuff just isn't as good as it usually is. Like, if you want to talk about puppets fucking, Greg the Bunny is a lot more humorous about it than, say, oh wow, when he comes it's like Silly String and he just can go all fucking day. Isn't that hilarious? I mean, for a second it's funny, but it's definitely not that funny. And then the big problem is that a lot of the jokes have already been done, and then a lot of the jokes that haven't been done just aren't that funny. The world building is not that strong. The actual puppetry was terrible. It was really bad, and there's not an excuse for that. Like, Kidding just came out this year, and the puppetry on that show is so amazing. Like, there are so many times where I'm like, how are you doing that?
And when you mention, like, some of the raunchiness, like, later on in the show, there is some of that as well.
The puppetry work in Kidding is so much more sophisticated, and, like, a lot of the more adult jokes are such a different flavor than what you normally get in adult humor in general, but especially very different style of humor than what you get in a lot of other adult puppetry humor. Kidding was so much better than the Happy Time Murders. It's a little ridiculous. But then the big thing is also if you strip away the gimmick of the puppets, which the gimmick wasn't very good in this movie, and you focus on it as a noir murder mystery, it is dull. It is paint by numbers. You've seen this movie a million times before. You know exactly what it's going to happen. You know exactly what's going to happen 40 minutes before it happens. It was just so god-awfully bad. There were only like 2 good jokes in the entire movie. There were 2 good jokes in, I think it was like a 2-hour movie. And to be fair, Melissa McCarthy and Maya Rudolph actually did have very good performances. They had some good physicality. It's not their fault that this movie was bad, but nobody had anything to work with. We didn't really enjoy Call Me By Your Name last year, but that same director put out a remake of Suspiria that people seem to lose their minds over. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why, except for there is one really phenomenal scene in that movie that is easily one of the best moments of filmmaking this year. Yeah, right. For sure. But that's a great short film and a very mediocre film.
Well, yeah, and I was skeptical about the idea of desaturating a movie that's so vibrant. But, like, my real issue with that movie is it takes some of the most subtle and, you know, multi-interpretive moments from the original and just spells everything out for you. Like, yeah, there's so much talking in the movie. I mean, like, this is a movie about dancing, and there's so little movement in the movie.
Which is really sad especially because well, one thing I will not fault this movie on is the performances were excellent all around. I think Dakota Johnson was the best pick for the protagonist in this film. And I know a lot of people were really skeptical, but I could see it going in and watching this movie. My big issue wasn't her performance. I was concerned about her physicality. How is she going to perform as a dancer? I don't really understand her background. And the dancing and the choreography and the physicality of the performances across the board were phenomenal. I have some issues with the choreography itself. And there is a thing of the screenwriter, who is a dude, was not familiar with dance in general. And he had this idea of he needed to learn more about choreography because the choreography had to work into the story. And he needed to be able to write about it in his script. But he explicitly only wanted to learn choreography or study choreography that was choreographed by women for women. And my issue with that is that's a neat idea if you're coming from it with a background in choreography or if you have like some more consultation. But if you just don't know anything about dance and you're like, I'm only going to look at female choreographers who choreographed for female dancers, you're going to have such a limited amount of knowledge to even study from, let alone view as inspiration for your own movie. And I think that did a real disservice to the performances.
Well, and like, it was frustrating because this movie was trying so hard to be Black Swan.
It didn't need to be Black Swan. We already have Black Swan.
Yeah. And so many of the horror elements in the movie were like, oh, don't worry, we're gonna cut away from that in like a split second.
Yeah, don't worry, it's not gonna be too difficult for you to watch. For sure, except for that one moment in the movie that was just phenomenal. Yeah. And I'm not gonna talk about it too much because I really don't want to spoil it for people who don't know. But if you've seen the movie, you know the moment. Like, oh my god, that one scene is just fantastic. And the reason why this one particular scene worked is because the choreography and the action and the horror elements in the film play into the theme of the story in a way that the underlying story that the movie's trying to tell fails at the rest of the film. They decided to go with, we're gonna misplace the movie in time. Not misplace, because that sounds like it was a bad idea, but it kind of was. We're gonna make this about World War II.
No, the Cold War.
Is it about the Cold War?
Yeah, it was after World War II.
So we're gonna make this about
during the Berlin
War.
Wall.
Yeah, the Berlin
all that kind
Wall
of stuff in the
was the
70s.
big thing. Yeah, you're right. I am so sorry. I was like, it's the Berlin Wall, so it's World War II, but I'm totally wrong. You're absolutely right. It's the Cold War. We're gonna have it based around it's
mostly like the terrorist attacks that happened after Munich.
Well, right, but the big thing with this movie is they wanted to make the movie about Trump. So we're going to take it out of time and space. We're going to talk about the other wall, the big wall in our history. Move it out of Italy, move it out of its time period, go to Germany during, the whole thing with the wall. Look at how evil the wall is. Look at how evil Nazis are. Look at the evil the evil rise of the right. Look at, Nazis, neo-Nazis, alt-right, blah, blah, blah. The problem is that except for this one scene, that doesn't play into the characters, it doesn't play into the story in a very significant way. The movie just kind of keeps interrupting itself to give you news footage to be like, do you get it? This is about Trump. This is about today. This is what it could be like. Make sure this never happens again. Do you get it? Do you get it yet? Oh my god. Just do something with it or don't bring it up. Like, it was just a weak, wishy-washy, last-ditch attempt to be socially relevant. And if you're doing a remake, you should make it socially relevant, but do something with it, for God's sake.
That's the problem about Trump in general, is Trump essentially trumped any media trying to parody or reference him. None of it's any good. And if there is, please let me know, because, I'm willing to check it out. But another example of a movie that's totally...
Who is America?
Okay. But yes. But another example of a movie that's totally about Trump, but not about Trump, is The Death of Stalin.
Which was also a pretty bad movie this year that a lot of people really hung on to. And I was so excited to see it. I thought it was going to be really great.
Any movie that has like a controversy and it's like, oh, it's banned in a country, I gotta see
it. Exactly. Yeah. It was banned. That made it look like it was at least doing something worth talking about. I'm a little bit of a Russian history, Russian literature, passive fanatic, I guess. I'm not like the smartest or the most well-studied, but I enjoy it. I took a couple courses in college that makes me, that makes me learned enough to talk about it in a way that most plebeians can't. The Death of Stalin was just boring. It was just so boring. It was a lot of really awkward performances too. They're trying to do this really weird thing where they're playing Russians, but they're not emulating Russian mannerisms. They're American actors emulating British mannerisms to play Russians, which just made the whole thing super weird and awkward. But The Death of Stalin was just really dull. There wasn't much to talk about it after the fact. It wasn't provocative. It wasn't, oh my God, clutch my pearls. I can't believe they did that. It was just dull. It wasn't very funny. It wasn't very provocative. It was just there. It existed.
One that was kind of painful for me was an installation from Aardman Animation, which was... I want to like Aardman and everything they do. They've knocked it out of the park with tons of movies, tons of shorts, and all that kind of stuff. But quite frankly, Early Man was not one of them for me.
Yeah, and it made me really sad. Because I was so excited. I was excited for years for Early Man. I had been waiting for this movie for so long. And I didn't realize that the movie was going to be about... I knew it was going to be about cavemen, and that's why I was really excited about it. It was set up like, oh, it's about like the Neanderthals versus the civilized age. And I was like, that's such an interesting idea. You can do so many fun things like with motifs and with... set pieces and with art. This is going to be so fun and funny, and I was so excited about it. And then it turned out, no, it's about soccer. It's about football.
It's basically a remake of The Big Green that was made in the 90s and was like a cheap knockoff of like Little Big League and like all the little sports movies that came out in the 90s, like The Mighty Ducks and stuff like that. Like, it was in that genre, and that genre is so... it's such a contrived genre. Like, it's so cookie cutter. Like, there's plot point to plot point, and there's usually not even a subversion in those movies. It's just, the underdog team has a couple, struggles, and then they manage to get together and defeat the big bad team. The film that's most people are going to think of when they see this is Dodgeball.
Right.
But, it's not as good as that. Like, it really isn't, and that saddens me because, I don't think Dodgeball is a great movie, but it is enjoyable. And while there were some good animated parts, like the very opening of the movie, it just let me down.
It really let me down too. And I think a big part of the reason why this movie made me really sad is I feel like the reason why they brought football into it at all is because this was their attempt to sell out. And I hate that they're being pushed into that position, but Aardman Animation makes some of the most financially successful stop-motion animated films, bar none. And they still get shit on, they still get put through the ringer for not being profitable enough. There's a movie, Pirate Band of Misfits, which was originally supposed to be known as Pirates and an Adventure with Scientists. And that movie is phenomenal. Love that movie. That movie is so funny. It has such good artwork to it. It's seriously like just one of the best movies ever. They play a Flight of the Conchord song in it, and Anton Yelchin plays an albino pirate. Like, it's the best thing ever. For real. It's such a good movie. And it was the third highest grossing stop motion film ever made ever. And it was profitable. Because you can say, oh, well, it made this much money, but it's profitable. It was very profitable. It was actually a very financially successful film worldwide. But it wasn't financially successful enough for them to greenlight the already scripted, already ready to go concept of the sequel, which was going to be Pirates in an Adventure with Cowboys, which would have been so awesome. No, that got completely shut down because, worldwide profitability is still not profitable enough, which is where I think they took this concept of we're going to have, the Neanderthals versus the men of the Bronze Age, the sort of primitiveness versus civilization idea, and we're just going to randomly inject the most popular thing in the world, soccer. We're just going to put that in there, because then people will really want to go see it, which didn't happen to my knowledge, but...
Yeah, following that up, probably the most disappointing director follow-up was Ava DuVernay's film. I thought...
God, that was... I always hate to say this, because I feel like somebody will say something and I'll be like, no, that's right, but I've thought about it for a while. Wrinkle in Time has to be the worst thing I've seen this year.
Yeah. Selma was great.
Selma was great.
13th, I had some issues with it. It was a decent documentary, but, there were some structural issues that I had with the documentary. But overall, I think it was decent enough to say that I still had confidence in the director. After seeing A Wrinkle in Time, I no longer have confidence in Ava DuVernay. One thing that I will say is she doesn't seem to be able to make a film that isn't explicitly about race and race struggles.
Which is okay.
Which is fine.
There's
Spike
nothing wrong
Lee
with that.
Spike Lee kind of has the same issues sometimes as well.
The problem is what we're seeing with Wrinkle in Time is her ideas of how to deal with that are just abjectly terrible.
Well, it's also her defenders, too, where I hate this idea that a lot of progressive-minded people are giving that if you don't like this movie, therefore you are racist, sexist, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, here's the thing. If you want to talk about Spike Lee, he can be divisive, and you can agree with him or disagree with him, but you can kind of see where he's coming from with a lot of the concepts he wants to put in his movies. The fact that Ava DuVernay herself, this was not a studio interference, this was not something from the actors, this is not something from the script, this was her idea. She said, the one thing I really wanted to do in this movie was I wanted to have this moment where this young black girl just reaches up and she brushes her hand against the face of a giant Oprah Winfrey, and that's going to be a big moment in the discussion of race and positivity in America this year.
That wasn't the lead black girl. That was Charles Wallace.
Oh, it was Charles Wallace in the movie. Okay. But she had this fascination with this idea, okay, if I'm going to make this movie, Oprah Winfrey has to be in it, and there has to be a moment where this young child brushes their hand against her face because she's such this god-like omnipresent figure. We have to all bow down and worship her. I don't know who, besides Ava DuVernay and the yes men who work around her, is going to look at that moment and be like, yes, you definitely needed to put that moment in there. That says so much and does so much good for people in America. Like, no, that was just a bad idea. But she was so enamored with the concept. I'm just like, oh my God. Not every bad decision in a movie comes down to being at the hands of the director, but that was her thing. And I'm just like, you needed to think of something a little bit more substantial to work your movie around than that one moment. And it's really a shame too. I feel like the actress from that movie, I don't remember what her name is, the character's name, but the actress who plays the lead in the film, I think she was a really phenomenal performer, and I'm very concerned that her being in this movie might hurt her career. which is a shame. She's really young. She's very, very talented. She was not the problem with the movie whatsoever. She was one of the few things in this movie that actually worked.
I think her best bet now is to jump onto a TV show and kind of work up from there.
That's not a bad idea, but that can be really demanding for somebody her age.
Yeah. Another movie that a lot of people lost their shit over that I thought had good moments but wasn't a great movie, surprisingly, is a follow-up from a director that I have a film of his on my list, but his follow-up was
yes,
and
I totally agree with you. Disobedience.
Yeah, Disobedience was okay. So I've had this complaint about certain queer films, and that is that they start following the tropes of, you know, essentially like, oh, look at this amazing taboo of it all. And, you know, their culture won't accept this. Okay, this has been parodied in Tropic Thunder. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, with the priests and all that kind of stuff. I think it was called like Satan's Alley or something like that. There's a funny thing with Robert Downey Jr. and Tobey Maguire where there's like this thing, and this movie kind of feels like a serious movie about that, you know, with two Jewish women who, you know, have to hide their sexuality and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just looking at it like,
the concept
and the
is
frustrating
not a bad
thing
idea.
is, who's the most interesting character in the movie?
The husband.
The guy.
The husband who, yeah. The husband is definitely the most interesting, nuanced character, because the two lesbian characters have very little character of their own, and they have no chemistry whatsoever. I think Rachel McAdams was a very incorrect casting for this film altogether on every angle. Her performance was not interesting. She didn't bring anything new to it, and she just had no chemistry with Rachel Weisz whatsoever. Just none. And then, of course, you can bring up the fact that, like, she's not Jewish. That might have something to do with the reason why she doesn't work in this movie.
Well, they're both not Jewish, and they're both not lesbians, but...
Yeah, but Rachel Weisz, at the very least, I could feel a little bit more chemistry from her, at the very least. I like Rachel Weisz very much, but I feel like a lot of the problems with her performance had very much to do with the fact that the script just wasn't good, and the direction was not good, and the ideas were not going to work. And by the way, can I just put it out there, for the love of God, women don't just casually spit into each other's mouths? I saw that twice this year. What the fuck is with that?
What was the other movie?
Oh, man. It was in a movie. I think I saw it on TV somewhere, but I was just like, what? That is not a thing. Like, in the movie, when it happens, it's not even like this is like a dirty, kinky thing that we're into. It's just like, oh, that has to be put in there because that's what lesbians do, right? No, we don't hold each other down and spit into each other's mouths. Like, no. I know that's a weird thing to hold on to, but that was just such a terrible, stupid moment at the end of a really, really bad scene. It's very difficult for me to remember any time I've seen like a lesbian couple having sex in a movie or on screen anywhere that was just that awkward and terrible to watch. It reminded me a lot of this one phenomenal scene from The L Word, where Jenny is directing her own movie, and she's working with these two straight actresses, and she's trying to teach them how to finger fuck, because they don't understand how they're gonna have sex in the scene, because they don't understand lesbian sex because they're straight. And Jenny is just super mean to them about it. She's like, can you act like you're trying to give her pleasure and not like you're trying to plunge a toilet? Like, it reminded me so much of that scene, but not in a good way. Oh, Disobedience was... It was so lackluster. It actually reminded me very much of like maybe being a Sean Baker film. It was just so shallow and characterless and pointless.
Definitely another minority opinion that we have is...
Oh, I despise Sean Baker.
Yeah, Sean Baker is definitely not a director that's on my radar.
No. another movie that came out from a very beloved director, and this movie has gotten a lot of attention this year, and I despised it. Isle of Dogs. People tend to love or hate Wes Anderson, but no matter what, they seem to give him a free pass when he works with very talented animators, and they are very, very talented artists. But then they go back to, it's because of Wes Anderson. Stop motion animation is just his medium. This is where he can really shine. I'm like, no, he's holding back these amazing artists from doing really incredible things because he has no imagination. And he relies on the better visuals of better artisans than he is. And he likes the stop motion craft because he can be even more controlling and even more flat and personality-less than he can with real life people.
I mean, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Wes Anderson is the equivalent of putting OCD onto a screen.
But you say that like it's a negative thing. OCD tendencies don't necessarily have to be negative, and OCD or other things like that in film aren't necessarily negative. Like, Pi legit just straight up gave me an anxiety attack because, like, the way that it deals with anxiety in that movie is just so upsetting. But it's phenomenal. It's a beautiful piece of artwork. Just because that's anxiety on screen doesn't make it a bad thing. I just think with this, he doesn't have anywhere to go. He doesn't have anything to say. Isle of Dogs doesn't say anything. It doesn't mean anything. And then on top of it, it's offensive as hell. And just, it's really a shame because a lot of really world-class, talented artists put so much beautiful work and effort into this movie, and it's just garbage. Oh, and that soundtrack. There was actually a phenomenon around Isle of Dogs of people kind of similar to how now we have the walkout phenomenon with Holmes and Watson. There was the sleeping phenomenon with Isle of Dogs. There was a poll that was conducted, and it was a fairly small poll, but it was more than 50% of people who engaged with the poll said that they fell asleep during that movie and missed most of it. Like, it was a legit phenomenon, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that nothing's fucking happening in the movie, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that the soundtrack is just, it's not great.
Well, yeah, Wes Anderson has a very specific sound that he likes in his movies, and this is something that over the years is becoming more and more like his thing. And like, it's one of those things where like, if you like that, you'll like this. But if there's anything that kind of turns you off of that, you'll be more and more turned off of Wes Anderson. Wes Anderson is very much the director he wants to be, but in doing that, his films come off as extremely cold. His films come off as, you know, essentially a guy playing with toys and setting them up into a scene, which...
But getting mad if you touch them.
Yeah.
Or if you want them to, like, if you try to play with them and make them act out scenarios. I kind of see that a little too well.
I will say...
he's like the dad from the Lego movie.
I will say I did not see Welcome to Marwen to make that comparison.
Welcome to Marwen looks very painful, though, which makes me sad.
Because Marwen Call is a fantastic
documentary. The actual artist seems really fascinating and like he deserves better than this, but also I feel like Janelle Monáe might let me down because she's only been in good things so far, and then she's in this one, which doesn't surprise me. It seems like she probably signed on to this because she really identified with this person in particular and his character, but she didn't write the damn thing. It's not her fault. Outside of that, there were also a couple of other ones that kind of had a lot of accolades around them that we just really didn't get into. RBG. Nothing against Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a person, but this documentary was one of those, like, shop online, or, you know, infomercial. It was like an hour and a half long infomercial for Ruth Bader Ginsburg consumer products, as opposed to actually being a documentary about her as a person. And she deserves a lot better than this documentary. The storyline the way that the storyline was edited was all over the place. Weird points of her life came up at the wrong places and got dropped at the wrong times and brought up later in ways that didn't make sense. Lots of chapters
that,
just
I didn't know that much about her to begin with, and while watching the documentary, I felt like I had to go online and actually read about her because the documentary wasn't providing me that information, which is the most damning thing that I can give to the documentary. And yes, it will be nominated for Best Documentary.
Which is a shame because it's a garbage documentary. There's a lot of... Ruth Bader Ginsburg is such an important person, you guys. Like, they will say that 5 times before they will tell you one reason why she's important.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll talk about, like, oh, look at the neck thing she wears, and look at how all these people want to put her face on mugs. That's because she's, like, a real icon. Yeah, but why? Why? Talk about her. Talk about her life. Talk about what she's done. Talk about her career.
Don't just assume that people know this already.
Well, also, I knew this stuff already, and this documentary still annoyed the hell out of me, because that's not the point of a documentary. It's supposed to be about her, not about people on Etsy being able to sell their products that have her name or her face on it. Like, really? So that was pretty bad. We also saw Mary Queen of Scots, which let us both down immensely. It was a directorial debut, so I try to give the director a little bit of leeway on this, but she had a big hand with the script, and the script was just never going to work. Everybody was very flat and two-dimensional. It was having to work against the fact that the 2 women had to be perfect, wonderful in every way, and the men were just these evil scumbags who were bringing them down, and that's the only reason why they couldn't be successful, without actually fleshing out any of the characters or the relationships in the movie. Nothing is ever the women's faults, and that makes a movie boring.
No.
It's just dull. Bird Box has been getting a lot of talk about being, like, so scary, but Bird Box was, it had some really great moments in it, but unfortunately it's just too full of filler. It spoils itself a lot. So there are a lot of times where, like, you already can put together what happened, and then you have to spend 15 minutes of screen time of them explaining to you what happened after you've already figured that out a long time ago. There's a lot of hand-holding. There's not a lot that's scary or intriguing about it. And it's, bizarrely religious-y. Like, it seems very much to be, you need to hold on to your blind faith throughout the rapture in order to get your just rewards. Learn from Job kind of story that just removed any of the actual references to God, but...
I could easily see this movie being played in, like, Sunday youth groups and stuff like that.
Yeah, very easily. If you've heard about some controversy about this movie being about racism, I've read that one single article from this one single reviewer. If you saw it on Twitter, it's the same person. I'm like pretty sure this person is trolling.
I hope the person is trolling, because if the person's trolling, it's like one of the best, like, Onion-esque articles I've read.
It's a very Onion-esque article where in the middle of it, he kind of goes on a diatribe about how he wants to write a horror movie about, this white woman who wakes up one morning and finds that everything in her life is coated in gluten. It was a really amusing segment of the article, but also that's a Junji Ito short, and yeah, it's really disgusting. But it wasn't gluten, it was oil, but oh my god, that... It's a much better Junji Ito short. But he talks about how, like, he saw Freddy Krueger as trying to save the neighborhood from gentrification, and how he could see that in The Force Awakens, Finn was actually playing Nat Turner, and he gives this synopsis of what happened in Star Wars, which is literally the exact opposite of what happened in that movie. So I'm pretty sure it's a troll. It's not a real thing to take seriously about the movie. It's not about white people blinding themselves to racism, and it's also that the article's allegory falls apart when they're like, and Gary is Donald Trump. No, that doesn't actually make any sense within your own thesis. It's a joke. But then the big kahuna of movies that people lost their shit over. from a director that we adore, that we were super excited about, that just ultimately was so disappointing, was Roma. And this is going to be a big deal. A lot of people have put Roma as their favorite movie this year, top 10, easy.
And it's one of those things where, like, even mentioning that it doesn't make our list and why and all that kind of stuff, and even gets into the negative, is going to cause controversy.
Of course it is.
I've had fights with people about this. And for me, it is a film that the structure of it ruins it.
Absolutely. This was a movie. We both really love Alfonso Cuarón. You probably more than me, simply because you've seen more of his movies. But we were so excited for his new movie. We were all on board. This isn't a thing of like, well, we just don't like this person, so we were prepared to dislike it. Or, well, we saw trailers and it didn't look good. We didn't see anything. All we saw was the poster on Netflix when we were getting to queue it up. We didn't know anything going in except for it was Alfonso Cuarón's new movie, and we were excited.
I knew it was about a cleaning lady. That was...
Oh, okay. I didn't even know that.
It was about a cleaning lady, and the cleaning lady was supposed to be representative of his mother during her time.
Right.
But, like, outside of that, I didn't know much. I knew the film was in black and white, which, you know, is a bold move.
Is it? Is it a bold move?
I will say that it's one of those things that even today is still criticized for, you know, you put a movie in black and white and automatically you become pretentious. And then you have to fight the whole way through the movie trying to argue that you're not pretentious for having black and white.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. But the movie did come off as pretentious. It came off as cold, and it came off very much as Alfonso Cuarón wants to show off his technical prowess. He wants to flex for you, but he's not that interested in working with the story, working with the characters. And honestly, his technical prowess was lacking in this movie significantly. My big number one huge problem with this movie is it takes a good 45 minutes to realize who the main character of the movie is, because she's so sidelined you don't even realize the movie is about her. But there's never a moment where the movie is really about her. And I understand this is a big part of the storytelling. The movie wants to give you the impression of how she is passive in her own life, how she doesn't have control over her own life, how she gets put aside by everybody around her, and she doesn't have a place to fit in, and she is really alone in this world. And if something were to happen to her, and while she's going through this major life-changing catastrophe, the world will just keep spinning without her, and it's not going to matter. But you still have to care about her. She still has to be someone you can identify with to any degree. She still needs to have a moment in her own movie to pay this off a little bit. And at the end of the movie, we spent the whole time with this girl, and the only thing I know about her is that she really is terrible at picking up dog shit. And that's terrible. I need to know a little bit more about her than that. That's not acceptable. And the big problem is she is sidelined for these big moments for other people. Like, she is pushed off to the side so we can learn more and identify more and have more time with her boyfriend and her boss. And these people that, like, it's not their story. It's supposed to be her story.
Yeah, and there was a specific technical thing that Alfonso Cuarón did in this movie. He wrote, directed, edited, and did the cinematography for this movie. And I think this is a prime example, at least with my opinion, that a director should never be doing that many things.
Yes.
So when it comes to the cinematography, it felt cold and calculated because he probably put it on a timer, because it seems that the shots don't move with the characters. They seem to move on a timer and just drift to the right, pan to the right, pan to the left. It got to the point while watching the movie, I could predict where the shot was going, and it was frustrating me because then all I could think of was, oh, we pan to the right, we might get a static shot, and then we're going to pan to the left, right?
And
every single time. Yeah, most of.
And that's not difficult. I'm sorry, that's not a difficult gimmick. That is not flexing your technical prowess. That, especially considering his last movie was Gravity. Maybe it can be a little difficult to explain this to you if you just watched Gravity and you were just so involved with it that you didn't notice the cinematography. But go watch the behind the scenes of how much work and how insane it was for them to even shoot that thing. Oh my god. And that's the big reason why I'm so in love with Gravity, is because from an effects standpoint and a cinematography standpoint, it's really difficult for me to think of a movie that had more obstacles to overcome that just seemed so impossible than that movie, the way they made it. And it looked so amazing. And then to follow that up with, you took the gimmick from Paranormal Activity 3 and you did it worse than it was done in that movie that came out a decade ago.
Well, we said, and we'll say again, this is minority opinion, because this is a darling by critics. I actually have not even seen negative reviews from average viewers about this movie, because everybody is just unanimous in praise for this movie. And
and there was even a thing where we were literally able to predict, probably a good 25 minutes before it happened, exactly how the film was going to end.
I predicted the final shot.
That's not a good thing, especially because you and I don't think we were thinking that hard about it. Yeah. It's not like we were intentionally going out of our way to guess it. It was just so insanely obvious, and he just went with this really obvious choice that didn't mean anything.
I mean, it bookends the movie.
It bookends, but it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything to the characters. It doesn't mean anything to the story. It doesn't mean anything to the themes, as poorly executed as the themes are. The ideas of the movie are very strong, but the actual execution is so floundering.
Yeah, and when you have moments like her boyfriend being part of this rebel group, her having a miscarriage and all this kind of stuff, sorry, spoilers, but with all of that stuff, if he had spent time with that character, we could have had a much stronger emotion. Now, I get that some people really feel for it, but I guarantee you that would have hit you harder if you knew who she was.
Well, the big problem is that in the movie, when all of these things happen, there is never any time where we sit with her and we get her emotional reaction to these things going on with her. That's the big problem. And the way that they're framed is usually she's not even in the frame. She's kind of sidelined. But she needs to at least have some time with herself where we can be there and we can, metaphorically hold her hand and be like, oh my God, I can't believe all this is happening to you and that you feel this way. She doesn't have any moment to have her own emotional expression. Not by herself, not in front of anybody else, not with us, nothing. So when all of these things happen to her, nothing happens after that. We don't get to see her reaction or how she feels. These are just things that happen.
And then one of the most emotional moments structurally in the story, the audience is literally blinded from seeing her.
Yeah, and also, it wasn't that emotional.
It's a gorgeous shot taken outside of the context of the movie, and that's my biggest problem with a lot of these shots. Sure, they might look great, just watching them individually, but altogether as a narrative, not so much. Roger Deakins is one of the most praised cinematographers of our day. One for a movie that I unfortunately did not love his cinematography for, and I knew he was going to win, but I that being said, he's a director. I mean, he's a cinematographer that has always said that he will only do shots to help the story. You know, like, he doesn't want the cinematography to just be a gimmick. He wants the cinematography to move with the story. In almost every single one of his films, you can see, you know, there are many moments where at least average viewers do not notice the cinematography. One of the only things that people can talk about Roma is the cinematography, which means
it's calling too much attention to itself.
Yeah.
And with Gravity, at least, like, the insanely difficult cinematography they did was for good reasons. It was to put the audience in the headspace of the protagonist. It was to get this claustrophobic feeling of the expansiveness of the universe. I don't understand the purpose of the panning shots other than, well, I understand the purpose of it. It is this idea that the world will keep on spinning with or without her. But it's too much of the movie. It's like seeing Dutch angles in Battlefield Earth. You just get tired of it.
Yeah.
And you predict it. And this extends to a lot of things. A lot of ways I can tell a good director is how well they can direct their extras. And there's this scene that a lot of people have been praising the movie for that just broke the movie for me, where they're out in the streets and you have these two factions in like a gun down in the middle of the road. And I could predict the way that the camera was going to pan because it had been doing it the whole movie. But there was an extra who literally looked like an NPC in a video game, where he was kind of hidden behind a car, but not very well. And he was just kind of like bobbing up and down just slightly, just like counting because he was on a timer. He was just like 1, 2, 3, 4, da 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 da. 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's on Netflix. So you can go and watch the scene.
I was stunned. I couldn't believe that I was just like counting along with him because he literally looked like he was set on a timer. And he was not giving any performance, by the way. He literally looked like he was a dude who was brought in and somebody who was not the director gave him a prop gun and it was like, okay, you're going to stand here and you're going to shoot at the other side. And that was his entire direction. And nobody worked with him outside of that. And I don't blame the extra. He's an extra. But, like, sometimes actors can, like, sometimes it's really not the actor's fault. Sometimes it's really the director's fault. And a lot of people were involved with making the movie who let that moment happen. This moment was supposed to carry the emotion of the moment. And it was right there where everyone could see it. And the director, the the script supervisor, continuity, nobody looked at this shot that I'm sure that they did multiple times. It was like, that's just not very effective. That's not working for the moment. Let's do something about it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And that was kind of my frustration throughout the movie. I mean, I did get to a certain point where I was actually yelling at the screen. I was watching at home, so don't get mad at me. But I did get to a certain point where I was yelling about the continuous pans. And, you know, that's when I got to a certain point where it's like, oh my God, there's going to be this huge revelatory moment at the very end where it's going to pan and then it's going to pan up.
And we're going to see that airplane that we saw at the beginning of the movie.
Exactly. And I said it verbatim like that, and that turned out to be the ending of the movie. And like,
and I get that it's because everything is cyclical and everything repeats, but there was nothing to do with the airplane. That didn't mean anything to the movie. It was just there so you would remember it.
I mean, part of me thinks that it's like the men in their lives are escaping or they're watching, like,
I mean, okay,
there's an obvious motif going on and I just didn't get it.
To be fair,
possibly.
One thing with this movie is I definitely don't know anything about the specific guerrilla war that they're talking about in the movie that I didn't read from a headline on Wikipedia. But I also feel like it's not like he's not making this for an American audience. And also,
films are universal. Like sometimes even the more specific is more universal.
Yeah,
but
just because I don't know the specific details, I don't think that knowing details of like, oh, I know that this war was between these factions and it happened in this location, and I know that that's going to lead to this thing that happened after the movie was over. I don't know that knowing any of that stuff is going to help me feel more emotional connection to the movie that I'm already watching. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, like with several of the films that we talked about, while there are the films in my top 10 list, and I'm very confident about those, the films that hurt me the most were the films by directors that I had a lot of faith in, that just let me down in one way or another. And for me watching it, it was kind of this moment where, you know, after reading review after review, talking, you know, massive praise on like all these films, it's one of those things that I think of like each year that I watch films is, am I just watching a different movie than everybody else? That's kind of how it feels. Like, I don't know what it is about me that's making me have such dramatic different opinions from, you know, what I would say is almost unanimous appraisal of the films.
Well, I think part of it is people are individuals. And also what is reflected in our media is not necessarily reflective of the majority. Just because you see certain publications or certain authors who have their own, you know, specific biases and tendencies, because everybody has a bias and a tendency. Mm-hmm. Everybody. I'm not calling them out and being like, how dare you be biased? We're all biased. I'm biased. You're biased. Everybody's biased.
Well, and then there's also the, I don't want to be clumped into a category because I don't like this. Like, it's like the people criticizing the movie Get Out for any reason don't want to make that public because they don't want to be seen as racist.
Or like, I actually went to a screening for Get Out where it was an all-white audience, which, okay. But they were so afraid to laugh at anything. They were very confused. And even jokes that had nothing to do with race or racism whatsoever, they were just too afraid to laugh at it because this is a serious and important movie.
Yeah, that happens. I mean, we also kind of had this same experience with Black Klansmen, where a lot of people in the audience were kind of like afraid to laugh at some of the stuff that
was comedic.
Yeah, you're supposed to laugh at it.
I don't think that there is a Spike Lee movie that doesn't have some form of comedic element in
it. No, Spike Lee has a great sense of humor when he uses it.
For sure. So, on that note, tune in next time. We're going to actually get into the good movies this year, not just shitting all over the movies that everybody else liked.
And there were several other movies that we did not include in our bad to mid-range. There were a lot of like mid-range movies that didn't really even deserve to be discussed.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And we saw, between the two of us, we saw at least, I think, a good 80 movies this year. We're not going to sit down and tell you every single movie that wasn't going to make our top 10. Like, Truth or Dare, even though it was kind of enjoyable and better than it had any right to be, is very obviously not going to be one of the best movies this year. Duh. I'm not going to waste your time telling you how much, Winchester really wasted its potential. Nobody thought Winchester was going to be the great movie this year. These are more and more just like the movies that are being hailed as like important tentpoles of the year that it seems like we don't want to make a point of ignoring them in the discussion of like the movies that happened this year. And that's also why we included all the movies that we just didn't get around to.
And almost every single one of these movies, except for the Happy Time Murders and A Wrinkle in Time, did have significant moments in them.
That's very true. Yeah, there were definitely a lot of these movies where it is important to talk about them, because talking about good moments, just because we didn't like them as entire movies doesn't mean that they were entirely without merit and that they didn't have some of the best moments in movies. It's just they weren't going to work.
Like the hospital sequence in Roma, I did think was very good on its own, as well as the beach scene.
The hospital scene really gets under my skin because there's a lot of stuff where like the timing drags out in a really.
I think we might be talking about a different hospital scene. Sorry, I need to be explicit. The one where she sees the baby in the earthquake.
Oh, that scene's amazing. You're right. Yeah, there are 2 hospital scenes. That first one was fantastic. But also, the reason why that scene is so good is because it's one of the only times in the movie where we get an actual medium close-up static shot of something important. And we actually see her facial reaction to something ever in the whole movie.
Yeah, the movie really, I know we continue to like go back to it, but like the movie is almost afraid to show her face. And the actress is wonderful.
Oh, the actress is really good. This is not about her performance. She did so much more than she was given to work with. But on one final note about Roma, I will say there was something I had heard, I forget specifically what editor had said this, and I feel bad because it's a very sound piece of advice. They said, if the character in a scene has not changed in some way from the beginning of the scene to the end of the scene, or from the beginning of the shot to the end of the shot, that needs to be cut from the movie. And you would have lost at least a good hour and 15 minutes out of Roma if you applied that, and that's not a good thing. And also the other hospital scene, the reason why I don't like that is because I feel like that was a cheap shot. It was the only time where I felt a visceral emotion, but that was a cheap shot. It's not because there was some sort of smart decision or good writing. That was just cheap.
Right. So that being said, let us know what movies were praised by other people or other critics, unanimously praised, that you just didn't see as all that great. Please let us know in the comments below. By the time award season comes, if I have enough people who have commented and put something on there, I will include it in our awards session just to see that there are varying opinions of some of the films that are being acclaimed. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back for our top 10 movies of 2018.